So, Clarence, I'm really
Thank you, everyone.
delighted to have you with us this afternoon. I must confess to you here that I had many a checkered conversation over the summer with Clarence as he was completing the final edits for the series, and we had some very lively, active debates about the content that you've just seen. In the context of the fact that this series is being shown not just as part of Film Africa, but also the BFI's In Dreams Are Monsters series, and obviously this is a quite sort of strong horror genre offering. I wondered if you could tell us a bit about your entry point into the genre and why you specifically chose to represent the story within this format.
I don't think I set out to with the genre in mind, honestly. I didn't think that I was trying to make a horror genre or psychological thriller. I didn't think from the point of view of a genre. These are what we just watched, the last two episodes of a four-episode series. Where I come from, this is, well, a part of it, even though it's heightened with some effects and things like that, most of it is just general life where I come from. It's not, to some people, yeah, it's scary and it's uncomfortable, but it's not unrealistic. It's not completely alien to a lot of people. For instance, the last scenes with the guys by the bus. Anyone who's lived in Nigeria for a while would know that once you're close to elections, well, things start getting really, really funny. People start getting missing. Just very strange things start happening that are really just tied to both our culture and just the times. Close to elections, close to Christmas, towards the end of the year. It's not unrealistic. This is pretty much what kind of happens. So in creating the world, I wasn't thinking a genre in mind. I was just trying to present, well, quite in a style that I think that the vocabulary of the style would probably help me express what I'm trying to say more. Just trying to present what happens in urban Lagos in particular. And
the red ring is something that acts as a thread through the story and ties in with a certain aspect of Yoruba mythology. I wondered if you could tell us a bit about how you were able to draw from Yoruba culture and some of the sort of indigenous folklore to develop and create some of the characters and the scenarios, and even to tell us a bit more about the red ring.
The story of the ring literally starts being kind of expressed a little in the last part that you've seen, but it was to set up the base for what the next season of the show is going to be about. But in terms of just influences from mythology, there's a saying in Yoruba. I'm going to say it in Yoruba. I'm going to now translate it in English. Majako folk agbaye, don't let them use a ring to hit you. It's something that comes from our culture, but it still exists very much in urban culture in Lagos and in other states. And it's not unique only just to Yoruba culture. It's across cultures in West Africa, where the rings can be significant for holding an instrument to hold power, right? To make it more portable, to move around and make it less assuming, right? It could be part of your fashion, but it's where your power is. It's almost like Samson with the hair, or magic being put on lockers and things like that.
And the In Dreams and Monsters season looks at a number of horror archetypes, from the witch, the vampire to the beast. And these are some of the sort of quite heated conversations we were having about the plotting of these archetypes against characters, within the indigenous culture. And one of the things that sort of came up when we were talking was the fact that, you know, in particularly if we're looking maybe at the Yoruba system, that a lot of the archetypes are sort of, they have duality. So I wondered if you could tell us a bit more about that.
We had back and forth conversations, and
This is
not
the two of
just
us.
not just with her, just also with some other people, and it started becoming how, when it comes to our culture and comes to our environment, how we see our archetypes. The Western world is used to being able to see archetypes as vampires, werewolves, and all of these things. And we haven't really boxed our characters into archetypes like that, primarily because what the archetypes we have can be filled with like 4 or 5 different powers or unlimited powers. All right, so you can have a witch, and it's more about what the witch is trying to achieve that kind of reveals what the witch is able to do. Unlike if it's a vampire, then the vampire is essentially just sucking your blood and all of that. So when we were kind of developing the characters, the writers and I kept, when we would have back and forth conversations, it would be, yeah, but technically a vampire is very beneath what a Bini witch is, because the vampire is predictable. You can't predict what a Bini witch is going to literally do to your entire existence. All right, and so that started a debate and a conversation that we put into consideration as we approach season 2 of the show, is to start to define the characters the way we know them. Right, not necessarily the way that everyone else is used to. We refuse to go into the box of the vampire or any of that and create our own archetypes based on what we know.
And I mean, the thing that is challenging, of course, is that there's a lot of difficult subject matter in terms of the abuse, the sexual violence, and it does become quite heavy in parts of the series. How did you psychologically deal with, you know, going into those aspects, both obviously on the page and in the production, and how did you work with your team and the actors or actresses in particular to kind of deal with those aspects?
This project was extremely cathartic for me. I had to face, which is why I don't think it's a horror genre. I didn't think about it as a horror genre. There are a lot of things that I had to discover about myself and about my family. That we knew, we just never had conversations extensively about. I would have conversations about it with certain parts of my family, and then also some friends and things that have happened to them. And those things aren't just happening to friends, it's very close to home. Originally, I had gone through an experience where during the lockdown I'd gotten locked up. And that's a different conversation. But I was in holding, and if anyone if you know Nigeria very well, when they hold you, it's kind of worse than being in prison where you are in, because in prison in Nigeria, at least there's some sort of structure. It's taken away from the rest of the government, and it has its own government. However, when you are in Banti or you're in any of the cells, then you're open to whatever happens to you. So I was there, and that is kind of where things started to, I started to build things in my head. Just from the way the space was, from the way the people were, from the way the system was. So it originally started about being about a show about you being locked up in a cell or in a prison. And that journey kind of led me into the reality that if you're in Lagos, every single day you step out of your house anything can happen to you. And you're very mindful of that. You're very mindful of the fact that you can step out and come back a millionaire, or you may not come back home. If you do, once you get home, pray and thank God for that day. And that began to build a lot of that. And that led me to having conversations. Episode 3 is the one with the house, with the little girl, and then she grows older. And that in part happened to the writer, who's my cousin. And so when she'd written, she went off the grid after we'd had conversations about the story for about 3 weeks, and then she brought the script. And so for some reason, I gave it to my mom. She was supposed to play a role, so I gave it to my mom, and I think that's why she didn't tell me, but I think that's why she didn't play the role. And she gave me back the script and said that my cousin has a lot to unpack because she can see a lot of the bitterness and pain in what she wrote because it happened to her. That's my mom. The exact same thing happened to her. And I kind of had to respect a couple of things and just kind of still balance out a couple of things in there because it was a lot more intense than what I had shot. And so by the time we move forward into the girls being locked up, I know people that had happened almost to, people who had been locked up who were supposed to be used for sacrifice and for some weird reason kind of got out of it, right? Either their families were able to find out, know who it was, do the right sacrifices, or pay money for them to get out, and then, so I kind of know people like that. I don't just know them from they told me about it. I know when that was happening, when it was trying to be sorted out, and just how it felt, like just knowing that there was a chance you were never going to see these people again. So it was very personal to me, and it was weird because as I was casting and I was working with people, and they were reading the script, they also knew people like that. All right, one or two of them had kind of, there's an episode that isn't here, and episode 2 that the girls had been. It's a one chance. One chance is you take public transport and you get into the bus, and you don't know that bus is supposed to be used for kidnapping or for ritual, and you don't know. And almost all the girls, especially the females that were on set, both cast and crew, were giving me accounts of how they experienced that. I didn't want to shoot it in a way that it would be comical or in a way that it would be subtle. It needed to be intense, because when you read about it on the blogs, you just say, that's sad, and then you put your phone on and you move on with the rest of your lives. My question was, if what's happening to your sister was happening to your cousin, you wouldn't put the phone down. And we're not used as people to seeing that. We're used to covering that up, and I didn't want to do that. I wanted people to be able to see it, all right? And I know that would make it very popular, but I felt that it needed to be done. Does that answer your question?
It does. And it kind of leads me to another one, which is really about it, further sort of unpicking that point about where do we draw the line, I suppose, as filmmakers and creators between, you know, as you've sort of articulated so well, this quite traumatic and personal experience. You know, you sort of put it on screen in its raw form. I mean, did you have any sort of lines or barriers, or do you think that it's important for filmmakers to have that? Because, of course, it sort of starts to get into quite difficult and shaky territory, you know, when we are still processing some of these things that have happened and they are in the screen and the response that, you know, it's going to have with the audience. And even in this age now where people are being more sensitive to having counsellors on set and looking at trauma. In your sort of own experience in terms of being in Nigeria or just your own practice, did you have a particular boundary or line where you thought, okay, this is how I can contain this or work with this kind of these kind of issues?
Yeah, to be honest, I did. I had to struggle with a lot of things with my approach to making this. But I'd like to say this. The rest of the world have faced they've had conversations about certain things, all right? they've been able to look at themselves through cinema, through television, and they've found some closure on some things and are still working on some other things. Within the continent, we haven't really. I'll speak specifically for my country, Nigeria. We haven't. Our culture, maybe you could blame it on our culture, you could blame it on whatever, but we haven't had those conversations. We don't even see that that's what cinema, that's part of what cinema is. So it's, if you tiptoe around certain things, right, you won't be able to regurgitate or really express certain things out in a way that is going to make them listen. If you hide behind comedy, if you hide behind the blankets of religion, just for what religion is, and hide behind the blankets of a lot of things, all right, and then it'll be business as usual. And you'd find out that there are a lot of people who want to unpack these situations, and who, because of the how divided we are as a country, both culturally and class, right? You have a lot of Nigerian cinema and code that talks about the upper class, and you guys don't get to see like the truth, and no one's actually saying anything about that. The old Nollywood in the 90s attempted it, all right, and then, well, we moved towards a transformation, and that kind of died. And I'm from that generation, and I know what a lot of the therapy that happened during that period, how we were able to use, the whole Nollywood was able to help Nigerians pass through a dictator just by just being able to watch Nigerian films constantly and being able to use that as a lesson for the younger generation, and that it actually served a purpose. Now we don't have that anymore, and we need that more than ever. So, yes, I'm not perfect, and it's not a perfect style or anything like that, but at least I want to try to be able to bring that back because I know what it can do. I might be wrong about this, but I've always had the opinion that there is no definition for a Nigerian screenplay yet. The fact that we are so diverse, and we have so many languages. The show has Igbo, Yoruba, Isha, and then Pidgin, right? That was one of the things. It was difficult for some people, but it was one of the things that also drew people to the project. It was the fact that they could act themselves. They didn't have to speak proper English or anything like that. They could really, really be themselves, and that was very important to me. One of the episodes was 50% in Isha, and people who were in Nigeria who spoke other languages didn't even know what language that was, and they were like, it just sounded very exotic. I'm like, what is your language? It's the language in the country. That just shows just how far we haven't really spoken to ourselves. I actually have no idea how to get finance in Nollywood. None whatsoever. Quick backstory, I actually came from film and television. I did that up until 2004. I went to school 2002, came back 2004, and didn't want to play in the Nollywood scene specifically because I wanted to be able to be in control of how I go about telling my story. And taking money from people means I have to start answering to them, and I didn't want to do that. And I just wanted to also build my team, so hence the music videos. All right, so it was an intentional thing to go into music videos. It wasn't what I wanted to do. All right, but then I ended up being there for a while and found it harder to to achieve certain things. That's what made me stay there for that long. So when we were doing this, this is all personally financed by me, one or two of my friends, all right, who took points on it, but mostly because of the resources that I'd gathered over a period of time. Like the lead here, her, she's a dancer. She's not an actress. This is the first time she's acting, and I've been working with talents like that for a long time, and I've just been in awe of just how good they could be when it comes to narrative work, and they don't even know it yet. So this was one of the reasons I actually wanted to do this project, was just to be able to show them that they could actually do it. Most people keep asking me, where did you find the actors? I'm like, they're here. All right. I'm not going to work with actors because of the fact that they have a brand name. If they're not going to be able to pull the characters off, and I know people say that, all right, in Nigeria now, they're starting to say that, all right, I actually mean it. I really don't care. Yes, you did. But that's also the thing about being able to put this together for you guys to see, because there's a lot of context 2 episodes before. All right. So I kind of understand how that you might have that difficulty in trying to understand, and while it kind of feels like halfway it flips into this horror. All right. That's intentional. Because of what's come before, but also because this entire show and this particular season was about creating a world. It was about world creation, all right. And setting up the characters so that by the time I would get into the next season, then I could sit down and we could start to really tear it apart. Because we didn't have a lot of resources. So at this point we are about 40% into the show. So the whole world of the show has already been created. The backstories, what happens to them in the future, had to be created first. So I could now pick what part can we tell. All right, let's take this part and tell that. And let a lot of people have a lot of questions. So if I get a lot of questions, all right, then it makes it all fun when we start to reveal everything else. Maybe not necessarily Parasite, but a lot of Chinese cinema of the 90s. Hence the cross with the neon, just a lot of the neon work that definitely came from that. My approach to cinematography isn't as, even though people might like to think that way, isn't in isolation in terms of trying to make pictures that have character and a lot of mood. I liked and even pushed the grade and all of those things from a world creation point of view, which is mostly led from where the characters are. So the issue has always been the fact that because of the resources I have, I never start from the beginning. All right. You always come again, like I say, I always come from the middle. But the things that inspire me are extremely vast. All the way from German Expressionism, all the way down to French New Wave, all the way down. Even because of the fact that I've spent a lot of time doing music videos, I've had a lot of time to experiment on a lot of tech, from 16 all the way down. All right. And that has made me, well, I'd like to say that's made me very fit, but also kind of polarizes my mind, just in terms of I'm trying to push my pictures not to be very now. All right, I'm very in the 80s, so I would blow out my highlights and throw the blooms in there because I love 16. I'm trying to still hold on to 16. So this first season hasn't been released. This is the first time anyone's actually seen this, hence the premiere. Writing process for season 2 is really interesting. We're just about to start in January, because when we're doing the work on this, we had created like the characters down and the scenario, which is one of the reasons why I wanted this to happen. Before it gets into that space, I wanted to be around people who like film, all right, and just get what the feedback from them would be like, before we go into into season 2, which is, well, it feels like it's going to be a lot more fun because now we know a lot more, right? You can write a script, put together a production, and plan everything to the T. I mean, to the last but T. But the first time that the actors come out and you roll, that's the first time that you really know what you're doing. And then when it gets halfway through the production, if you're lucky enough, the film starts to shoot itself. Right? It starts to, I mean, you're just guiding it because things just start to happen. So it's kind of the approach that we also have to the writing. Right? So we create the world down and then we just start to move. But I also work with a lot of feedback, a lot of indirect feedback. Right, so this is the first time I'm going to be working with like direct feedback, which is exciting.